Greenwood Tales, Part 6, The Rescuing of the Widow's 3 Sons. There are 12 months in all the year, as I hear many say, but the merriest month in all the year is the merry month of May, with a link a down and a day-o, with a link a down and a day. Robin Hood was striding along upon the broad high road that led to Nottingham town, singing the words of this song in a clear, joyous voice. The merry month of May had broken sweetly over fair England, and here was a glorious morning of sunshine and mild breezes after a long night of wind and rain. The sky was dappled with snow-white rolling clouds, with sheets of blue between, like azure lakes between snowfields. The roadside grass, the trees, the hedges were fresh and green as emerald, and sky and trees and hedges were mirrored, one and all, in the great pools left in the hollows by the roadside after the last night's rain. Suddenly, from a broad meadow upon Robin's right hand, a lark sprang from its grassy nest and mounted high in the air, singing as it flew. The sweet, continuous song floated down to the man upon the road and checked the tune upon his lips as he stood still to watch the bird until it vanished, a tiny speck among the clouds. "Ah," he cried, "we know what it is, Master Skylark, do we not, to live a free and careless life in England on a day in May? We know it is better to sing our matins under the wide heaven than to mumble them between four walls. Eh? You rogue? We know." The sound of sobbing, near at hand, brought him to earth again sharply, loud and piteous sobbing with a note of distress in it that made Robin halt at once. He lowered his eyes and looked round. 10 yards away, upon a leaning milestone beside the roadway, a woman was sitting with bowed head, holding an apron to her eyes. She was grey-haired and looked old, and she wore a neatly patched cloak and a snowy cap, but the outlaw could make nothing of her features, because her face was hidden in the apron. He crossed the road quickly and put a hand lightly upon one poor heaving shoulder. "What's the matter, mother?" he said in a gentle tone. The bowed figure sat up in a moment, and the dame, casting aside her apron, looked up at him, wet-eyed, in a startled fashion. The next instant she had dropped her face into her apron again, and was sobbing harder than ever before. Robin, taken aback by this fresh outburst, muttered, "Bless me," in a puzzled tone, and watched her for a second, his lips drawn together in a faint whistle. Then he bent forward again. "Why, mother, you'll cry your heart out," he said with rough kindness. Come, come, there was never yet an evil under the sun that was mended by weeping. Tell me what's the matter, and perhaps I can help you if it's in my power." Something in his coaxing tones seemed to soothe the woman, for presently the sobbing grew quieter and she sat up, wiping her eyes upon her damp apron. "So," said Robin, nodding, "that's better. Now, tell me." It was an odd thing about this Robin Hood, that finding any fellow creature, man or woman, in trouble, he had only to say, "Tell me," in those kindly tones of his, and soon the whole tale of grief or annoyance would be poured with a sort of relief into his patient ears. It was so now. At his "Tell me," the woman looked straight up at him, and then, with sobs still catching in her throat, she spoke. "It is my 3 sons, sir. Fine, brave lads, such as any mother would be proud to own, and all three of them are to be hanged this day in Nottingham town. Alas! Alas!" Robin's brown eyes grew solemn. "That is a bad business, mother," he said. "What have they done that they should meet their deaths so?" But the woman could not answer him. She had burst out weeping afresh, and a storm of sobs was shaking her from head to foot. Nevertheless, Robin stood before her patiently until the flood of tears had passed again. Then he spoke once more. "What have they done?" he repeated, "these sons of yours? Have they set fire to parishes or villages? Have they slain any holy men? Have they robbed any women? Murdered any children?" The woman looked up at him again. Then she answered solemnly, "Sir, they have done none of these things." "By the saints, and what are they being hanged for?" "For bearing their bows with Robin Hood the outlaw, for killing a few of his Majesty's deer in Sherwood Forest, for nothing else. It is the sheriff's doing." "Ah, that sheriff," Robin muttered. The woman looked at him keenly, then next moment got to her feet, still staring hard. "Why, I know you," she burst out at last. "Are you not Robin Hood himself?" "I am," answered the outlaw, and then looked at her closely in his turn. "And I think I've seen you before as well. Here, turn to the sun. Yes, I knew it." He slapped one green-clothed knee. "Now I mind the day when that same sheriff's knaves were hard at my heels, and you hid me in your house till nightfall, and so sheltered me and fed me and set me on my way again. Was it not so?" "Oh, dame, Robert of Sherwood hath a long memory for kindnesses done. Now tell me, at what hour are your 3 sons to die?" They're to be hanged at 12, she answered dismally. So? Well, 'tis but 9 of the clock yet. Take heart, mother. Much might happen within the next 3 hours. Farewell, then, and remember, Robin Hood will never forget. He nodded several times, told her gently to go home, and then set off upon the road again. Half a mile nearer the town, he met an old man shuffling along by the hedge-side in the sunshine. The stranger wore a pilgrim's cloak, all travel-stained and patched, and a wide-brimmed palmer's hat. As he passed the outlaw, he called, "Good day, master," in a high, piping voice, and Robin stopped. "Good day," he said pleasantly. "What is the news of the town, sir?" The palmer ruffled his grey hair beneath his hat. "Why, it is little new, master," he said slowly, "save that 3 men are to be hanged this day at noon for stealing. Had you heard that?" "Aye, they've made a stir too," answered Robin, thinking of the weeping dame by the roadside. "They have so," agreed the palmer, thinking of the sheriff. The outlaw looked his companion up and down shrewdly. "Will you change garments with me, old man?" he cried, and seemed to grow suddenly excited. Then he made a dive in the wallet that hung at his waist and brought forth a handful of silver pieces, which he held out towards the other. "Here's 10 shillings in good silver for you, if you will," he went on quickly. "Come, I think it's a fair bargain. What say you?" The old man looked hurt. "Your clothes are good, master," he said in a gravely gentle tone, "and mine are old and shabby, though it's not my fault that they are so. You should not laugh an aged man to scorn. It is not right to make sport of me." "No, I make no sport," cried Robin in surprise. "By my faith, I'm in earnest. See!" He pulled a piece of gold from the bag at his side and forced it into the palmer's hand. "There, does this not prove it?" he said. At the sight of the gold, the old man, after staring at him for an instant, agreed to the plan. In 5 minutes the exchange was made, and Robin, shaking with laughter, was viewing his new suit in one of the wide mirror-like pools by the highway. He cut an odd figure in the palmer's shabby hose and worn shoes, and the cloak patched in many places that well-nigh covered him, and in the battered old hat. "Saints, here's a matter for fun," he roared. "What a scarecrow am I turned into? 'Tis only the habit that makes a man what he is, surely. Well, Master Palmer, I thank ye heartily, and good day to you." He nodded over his shoulder, laughed gaily, and plunged into a belt of woodland upon the left of the road, striking out for Sherwood Forest. The old man looked after him for a moment, blinking, then shuffled off upon his own way, in Robin's suit of Lincoln green, clasping his gold piece tight and muttering as he went. It wanted but 10 minutes to noon, and in the marketplace of the town a little crowd of people had gathered to see the hanging. 2 high wooden poles with a crossbeam and a dangling rope stood in the middle of the market, and around this the folk had clustered curiously. Upon a wooden platform beside it stood the prisoners, 3 young men in green suits, their hands tied behind them, bareheaded, guarded by 3 of the sheriff's yeomen. The sheriff himself was there, fat and pompous as ever, astride his fine brown horse. But something had upset him, it was plain, for he mopped his hot brow continually, and sent 6 fellows scuttling out of the marketplace upon swift messages, whilst he himself stood up in his stirrups and ran his eye over the crowd eagerly. The folk, watching his anxiety, presently became excited too, and rumours began to pass from one to another, so that soon the alarm became known. It was almost time for the hanging, and the hangman had not come. Several minutes passed, whilst the people crowded together whispering, and the sheriff watched them, a frown between his eyes. Soon the messengers returned, one by one, and coming up to the brown horse, whispered each one something in the sheriff's ear. When he heard it, he frowned more than ever. After a minute or so, he lifted his voice and spoke. "Good people," he cried, "the fellow who was to have hanged these rogues has not come, as you can see, nor is he to be found, though I have sent out searchers far and wide. One of you, therefore, come forth and perform his office. Let the man who chooses to do so step forward, and he shall be rewarded." The crowd rustled and murmured, muttering one to another in low tones, but no one stirred. The High Sheriff of Nottingham was by no means loved by the townsfolk. Moreover, the widow's 3 sons, whom he now meant to hang, had been favourites of the people, and they were Robin Hood's men. Robin was a rogue, to be sure, but a kind-hearted one, and most of the townsmen bore him no ill will. So now they stayed where they were, watching first the sheriff and then his prisoners, and more than one man whispered to his neighbour that Jonas, the hangman, knew what he was about when he did not appear at the Lord Sheriff's bidding. "You may seek for his hangman for me," muttered one fellow. "I'll have no hand in the business of hanging the sons of a poor widow." "Nor I," answered his neighbour. "Ah, see, his lordship is growing angry." And indeed, the sheriff's looks were getting blacker and blacker as he saw no one step forth to offer his services. His fat face grew purple with wrath. "Oh, you knaves!" he cried, and spluttering with temper. "Stand out, one of you, I say! Stand out! What? Will none of you come forth?" Still no one moved, and the sheriff, watching them, burst forth again. I will have the law upon you all. I will send word to his majesty. I will—" A sudden tweak at his cloak made him come to a full stop, and he looked down at once. A man was standing at his horse's stirrup, an old man, grey-haired and bent with a long grey beard. He wore an old patched cloak. Patched hose covered his weakly bending legs. His shoes were old and worn. He wore also an ancient wide-brimmed palmer's hat, and he carried a staff. Now he looked up with blinking eyes into the sheriff's angry face. "Do you want a hangman, sir?" he lisped in a high, cracked tone. "Yes, in haste," replied the sheriff eagerly. The old man looked at him sideways with a silly smile, shuffling from one foot to the other. "What will you give to a foolish old man who'll play the hangman for you this day, then?" he questioned. The sheriff, gazing down at him, thought this old fellow was certainly half-witted. Such a queer figure did he cut, and so oddly did he speak. But at all events he seemed willing to do what the sheriff wished. That was enough. The people were watching the pair of them closely, and one or two began to smile. The sheriff smiled also, in a satisfied way, and with the air of a very great man indeed, bent down from his saddle. "I'll give you," he said, 2 sets of clothes, new ones, for I think you stand in need of them, old man, and 13 pence besides. Will that satisfy you?" The old man capered with delight, and so odd were his antics that the crowd rocked with laughter, whilst the sheriff looked on in amazement. "You are a nimble old fellow," he said in some surprise, "but come to thy business now." The other did not stir, however. Indeed, he seemed now to have forgotten the offer that the sheriff had just made, for his eyes wandered around a little absently, and then all at once he laughed. "Faith," he chuckled, I'm maybe not so poor as you think. And now I remember, I've never played the hangman before in all my life. No, I'm not so poor. No, look, I have a bugle horn. Come, cried the sheriff impatiently. This is folly, old man. I have no time for silly chatter. Get to your work. But my horn, persisted the old man. Let me blow my horn. I will not play hangman for you at all this day unless you let me blow my horn. He fumbled beneath his cloak and began to whimper, and the watching people whispered, "Oh, he's crazy." But the sheriff frowned. "Oh, have done with this fooling," he blustered. "Blow thy horn, madman, as hard as you will, and then get to the hanging and let us make an end to this business." The old man stopped whimpering and began to prance again, whereat the crowd roared. Then he dived under his cloak, unfastened an old bag at his waist, and brought forth a silver-mounted horn tied with flowing green ribbons. The 3 prisoners on the platform craned their necks to see, and next moment looked to one another in open-mouthed surprise. They had seen that horn before. But the old fellow heeded no one. He tiptoed up to the sheriff, dancing, one brown finger upraised. "Hark," he quavered, "hark to my beautiful horn!" Then set it to his lips and blew. "Come hither," a long, loud summons sounding clear over hill and dale. "Come hither," still longer and louder, and again, "Come hither," till those in the crowd thrilled at the brazen notes. As they died away, there was an instant's silence. Then, "Look!" cried a lad's eager voice, and next moment the people were indeed looking with all their eyes, and my lord the sheriff, gazing dumbly, felt a sudden chill of fear run through him. For into the marketplace, from every side, as if they had sprung from the very earth, flocked an army of Robin Hood's merry men. Like leaves blown from the trees in autumn, they swept and poured fast and thickly, surrounding the gaping crowd, the gallows, the platform, the sheriff, the man with the horn. The sheriff himself lifted a trembling voice, which he tried in vain to make stern. "Who are these men?" Then the palmer stood up straight, stepped forward, tossed his hat aside, and tore off grey hair and beard, showing to people and sheriff the merry face and brown head of Robin Hood of Sherwood. "They are my men," he said, and laughed a little, ever so softly, "and they have come to see justice done. Will that satisfy you?" He mimicked the sheriff's pompous tones. Then he lifted his crowd and spoke to the crowd, or lifted his voice even, and spoke to the crowd. "Begone," he cried, "all of you upon the instant, as you value your lives. Quick!" And the folk needed no second bidding, but one by one shuffled away. Robin glanced round, and his eyes fell upon the 3 yeomen guarding the prisoners. "You also," he called. "Hasten!" And the yeomen meekly followed the people. At last Robin turned to the sheriff and looked him over coolly. "I have the best mind in the world to hang you," he said. In a moment the sheriff was down from his saddle and grovelling before the outlaw, cringing and murmuring. "Pardon, master," he cried imploringly. "Oh, spare me, I pray you." "Oh, what a coward you are," said Robin. "You deserve a short shrift and a tight rope, let me tell you." He looked down for a moment at the terrified creature, then bent, picked him up, dumped him into his saddle, and striking the horse with the flat of his hand, sent it galloping out of the market. "Go after thy knaves," he roared, "and see that you meddle no more with Robin Hood or any of his men." Then he strode across to the prisoners, pulled out his knife, and cut the cords that bound them. "Your mother has well nigh wept her eyes out about this hanging," he said, "so you had best go home and comfort her." And the widow's 3 sons obeyed him.